Remember dreams? I haven't had one for years, which I'm assured is totally fine, but I still love a good old-fashioned professional wrestling dream match. We've been lucky to see a bunch of them over the years, but some dream matches have happened at the wrong time. Sometimes they take place before we even know we're watching a dream match, and other times they go down long after the intrigue has subsided. Still, it's fun to dream, isn't it? Not that I'd know, of course. The following 10 dream matches took place either at the wrong time, under the wrong gimmicks, or even in the wrong promotion, but they did actually happen, I promise. They're just probably not as good as they could have been under different circumstances. On with the list. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 wrestling dream matches that happened in the wrong era. Join us.
But before we start, this video is sponsored by Lord of the Board, a friendly backgammon game that you can play anywhere at any time. Click the link in the description below, download now, and you get 500 free coins. Ooh. Lord of the Board is my favourite game lately. In fact, it's possibly the best game that I've ever played. I'm already level 55 and I'm absolutely loving it. The game is totally free to play on both iOS and Android. The boards are stunning, and also it's just so cool to compete with players worldwide. If you're not familiar with backgammon, backgammon is a cool board game. It's more popular, fun, and addictive rather than chess or those other lame board games. You play backgammon 1v1, and there's always an online partner to play with. It's so fun, and it triggers your brain. And it's such a unique game. I've never found a game before that combines luck and strategy quite so well. I've been playing this game for over a year now, and I just love it more and more as they add new exciting updates and very special features too. And what I like most in this game is the unique table designs, daily free bonuses, prizes, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? If you want to try to beat me, then click the link in the description below, download Lord of the Board for free, and receive 500 free coins, and I'll see you there. Good luck, because I'm definitely playing it.
Number 10, Steve Austin vs. Randy Savage. Both Steve Austin and Randy Savage are iconic figures in the world of professional wrestling, known for their high-intensity wrestling styles, unique promo delivery, and hell-raising characters. The two of them colliding in a pay-per-view main event, say in the late 90s over the WWE title, could have been box office gold. Their one and only meeting, however, took place several years before, when Austin was simply stunning rather than stone cold. The two met on the May 27th, 1995 episode of WCW Saturday Night in a US title tournament quarter-final match. Taking place on a minor show in front of a small studio audience, it was hardly a thriller, the Macho Man getting the win with the flying elbow after just 2.5 minutes. The result was never really in doubt, since Savage was a solidified main event player and Austin was floundering. In fact, this would be Stunning Steve's second to last WCW match before he was famously fired by Eric Bischoff via FedEx. Number 9, Sting vs. KANE. The road to wrestling stardom sure was bumpy for Mayor Jacobs, who endured the rotten Isaac Yankem and fake Diesel gimmicks before finally finding a winner in KANE. Prior to getting to WWE, the Big Red Machine paid his dues like everyone else by working in various territories. Just a handful of matches into his career, the Big Two did give him a quick look, because Jacobs had the look and size for the era. Months before getting a tryout at a WWE television taping, he booked a gig as an enhancement talent under the name Bruiser Mastino for WCW. In his one and only bout for the Turner-backed organization, Bruiser took on, and easily lost to, Sting. KANE was as green as the Stinger's tights back then, so the match wasn't up to much. Had the two locked up years later when Jacobs was riding high as everyone's favourite pyromaniac and Sting had traded neon for black and white, they could have had a supernatural showdown for the ages. They did briefly interact during Sting's short WWE run when the Vigilante and the Viper cleaned house on the Authority, but KANE was wearing slacks at the time. Number 8, Chris Jericho vs. Mick Foley. After impressing with his work in Mexico and Japan, Paul Heyman booked Chris Jericho for ECW in what essentially amounted to his big break in the United States. He only wrestled 22 matches for the ultra-violent upstarts, but Lionheart managed to have some memorable meetings with the likes of Rob Van Dam, Too Cold Scorpio, and Raven. In his third match for the group, he tangled with MICK Cactus Jack Foley in what turned out to be the Hardcore Legends' penultimate ECW outing. The match, which took place at the wonderfully titled Big Ass Extreme Bash, wasn't half bad, but it also wasn't half as good as it probably would have been had it taken place a few years later in a different setting. A Foley vs. Jericho program in 1999 WWE, for example, would have been something to savour, as Y2J was a far more polished performer then after a few years in WCW, while Mick had established himself as a top star and beloved fan favourite under the guise of Mankind. The two joked about their lack of rematch during Foley's WWE Hall of Fame induction speech, with Jericho playfully laying down for an elbow, allowing himself to get pinned so that the man of the hour could get his win back. Number 7, Bret Hart vs. Hulk Hogan. Bret Hart still has an axe to grind with Hulk Hogan over the fact that the Hulkster neglected to wrestle and put him over in a WWE title match at SummerSlam 93. The all-babyface affair was supposedly in the works, but Terry took off before it could take place, taking a dream match off the table. The bout actually had happened before, however, and would happen again later. The first time the Hitman and the Hulkster locked up was on May 11th, 1979 in Georgia Championship Wrestling. Bret was just starting out, while Hogan was working as Sterling Golden and was also a few years away from superstardom. Almost 20 years later, the two faced off again in WCW. Now, you might think, good on Eric Bischoff for having the sense to do what WWE didn't, but WCW being WCW left a boatload of money on the table by giving the match away on free television without any significant build-up. The match was rubbish, turned into a total schmoz, and ended with Bret turning on Sting. WCW, innit? Number 6, Goldberg vs. Batista. If you like big meaty men slapping meat, and why the hell wouldn't you, Goldberg vs. Batista is a match you're probably going to want to see. Regrettably, it all went down before Big Dave had truly turned into the animal, and while DeMann was cursing his own existence during his first ill-fated WWE run. Batista was just 18 months into his main roster run and trying to find his feet as Evolution's enforcer. Goldberg, meanwhile, was World Heavyweight Champion and went into the match selling a supposedly shattered ankle. The main event of the November 10th, 2003 episode of Raw, it was short and to the point, predictably ending when Triple H ran in for the DQ. This match would have been a total blockbuster if it had happened years down the road. Batista got really good just a year or two after this meeting, while Goldberg rediscovered his passion once he'd been away from the business for a while and come back. Their styles and characters would complement each other well, I'm sure, and a short but sweet smash-mouth brawl would go down a treat in a major stadium setting. Number 5, CM Punk vs. Eddie Guerrero. When Eddie Guerrero was fired by WWE in late 2001 after getting a DUI, having just undergone rehab at the company's expense, he was forced to go back to the indie scene in a bid to rebuild his professional reputation. It was during this time that Latino Heat came across an up-and-coming CM Punk. The two clashed several times while Eddie was doing the indie thing, including in a pair of triple threat matches with Colt Cabana and Rey Mysterio. Their matches together were really good, and Guerrero certainly put a shift in despite plying his trade in ramshackle and poorly attended buildings. In their last meeting together, they went to a 30-minute time limit draw before Eddie, who had been re-signed and was actually reigning as IC champion at the time of the match, called an audible and decided to defend the title in an impromptu match. He won, of course, but he told the straight-edge superstar afterwards that he hoped to defend the title against Punk for real once he'd made it to WWE as well. Unfortunately, it never happened, as Eddie passed away in November of 2005, while Punk was toiling away in Ohio Valley Wrestling at the time. Number 4, Owen Hart vs. Jeff Hardy. There were lots of Owen Hart dream matches that we sadly never got to see due to his tragic and untimely death at Over the Edge 1999. Had that fateful night in Kansas City never happened, we would have been treated to the Rocket taking on the likes of Chris Jericho and Eddie Guerrero not too long after. Another great match for Owen would have been against the like-minded Jeff Hardy, who, along with brother Matt, really began to catch fire in the months after Hart's passing. The two did have one singles match on the December 11th, 1995 episode of Raw, however. Despite Jeff being an enhancement talent at the time and the match being booked as a squash, Owen let him shine a little before putting him away and feeding him him to partner Yokozuna for the Banzai Drop. 3.5 years later, Jeff and Owen would clash again, this time in a tag match as the Hardys took on Hart and Jeff Jarrett on an episode of Shotgun Saturday Night. Number 3, William Regal vs Samoa Joe. What a cracking match this is on paper. Two hard-nosed submission specialists who aren't afraid to dish it out or get it back. Regal vs Joe is the sort of surly pairing that should probably come with a violence warning for those watching. In their respective primes, you could see a match between them being a cracking strong-style affair over the Intercontinental title, for example. The best time for it to go down, given the careers of both, would have been the mid to late 2000s, but the Samoan submission machine was working for TNA back then, and by the time he showed up in NXT, Regal was long since retired. They did have one match together though at a UPW show in October of 2000. The veteran Regal was visiting the California-based promotion, which was sort of like an unofficial farm league for WWE and was where they got John Cena from, while Joe was in his rookie year, weighed about 100 pounds less than we're used to seeing, and wrestled in an ill-fitting singlet and Hawaiian shirt. Our William won before bizarrely being attacked by Triple H, who then beat up two nobodies. Even on the indies, Hunter has to look strong. Number 2, Shawn Michaels vs Rob Van Dam. The whole effing show versus the showstopper. Mr. Monday Night versus Mr. WrestleMania. Rob Van Dam versus Shawn Michaels. It was a match that was fantasy booked by fans when the Heartbreak Kid was on top in WWE and RVD was solidifying himself as the must-see talent in ECW. In the late 90s, it would have been a thing of beauty, especially with heel DX-era HBK leading the action. When it happened for real in late 2002, it was still good, but once again, the match was thrown out there with no real build and seemed to be over before it had a chance to properly get going. Also, this was Shawn's third match back since returning from a 4.5-year layoff, so he wasn't yet back into the groove as he would be later on. Headlining Raw, the World Heavyweight title bout felt like a taster more than anything and was over within 9 minutes following Triple H's interference. A rematch a few years later when Shawn was back to being a full-time performer would have been welcomed, but unfortunately didn't materialise. Number 1, The Undertaker vs Sting. When Sting finally made his way to WWE in 2014, the one match fans wanted to see him have above all others was against The Undertaker. The ever-present icon of WCW against the phenom of WWE, a Monday Night War's dream match realised almost 15 years after they ended. Sting himself had even expressed a desire to have the match, and it was talked about, but never came to fruition. Instead, Sting's two major WWE matches were him doing the job for Triple H at WrestleMania 31, and then doing another job for WWE champion Seth Rollins at Night of Champions in a match that looked to have ended the Stinger's career. Sting vs The Undertaker will remain a dream match, but it did actually happen many years ago, in September of 1990 to be exact, before Mark Calloway had become the Dead Man. A WCW house show main event over Sting's NWA heavyweight title, it was actually Mean Mark's last match for the organisation before leaving for WWE.